first of all, to start off, welcome everyone to perhaps one of the first deliberately produced podcasts of the Long March, one of the many facets of the classical liberal society. Hopefully, we have many of our members joining in tonight to participate in this discussion. We are graciously blessed this evening with Mr. Steve Baker, otherwise known as the Pragmatic Constitutionalist. He is maybe taking a brief hiatus from his nationwide COVID investigatory tour, meeting with various people, man on the street type meetings, and some exciting business at the Capitol. Maybe we'll get to talk about that some as well. And I understand you're preparing another round of travel up the eastern seaboard here in the near future. Is that accurate?
That is, I'm hoping to do the entire eastern seaboard from Florida all the way up to Maine in just a matter of weeks. Everything was a little bit derailed. Well, not so much derailed as postponed because of what happened in the Capitol on the 6th, but we're just about ready to start putting that all together again.
Okay. So for those who weren't able to join us previously, Steve actually stopped by one of our satellite locations in Columbus for part of his tour, and was graciously willing to be a part of kind of a live Q&A that was televised or streamed, I guess is probably more accurate. So maybe just for background, can you kind of fill us in on some of the activities that happened between your stop in Columbus and the eventual protest at the Capitol? So I'm sure there's lots of good stories in between.
Wow, you want before Columbus or after Columbus? you said between Columbus and there. Post Columbus, yeah. Well, yeah. There was one rather exciting event that happened when I left Columbus the next morning. As a matter of fact, I made my way down to Nashville, Tennessee, and I arrived in Nashville on Christmas Eve at about 1:15 in the afternoon. And there's a particular bottle of very special gin that I was preparing to present as a Christmas gift to my host, because I was staying with a friend in Nashville over the Christmas holidays, and couldn't find it immediately. But the first place I pulled into, I just used my Google Maps and found the closest liquor store downtown Nashville. So I pulled in down on 2nd Avenue and parked, got out of the car, ran across the street into the wine and liquor shop, and they didn't have it. So I jumped back in the car and headed over to another place on the west end of town, found what I was looking for, and then proceeded onto my host's house for the rest of the evening. We woke up, as you know, not only to share Santa Claus with one another, but we also woke up to the news that there had been an RV that had blown up in downtown Nashville. Well, it just so happened that the parking spot that I was parked in was exactly 2 parking spots in front of where the RV detonated less than 24 hours later. So that was, a bit of a wow moment for me.
Wow.
So there's, yeah.
Was the RV there at the time, or was there anything out of place that caught your eye when you came through?
No, the RV didn't arrive until early in the morning, something like 3 o'clock in the morning the next morning. But yeah, so that was a little bit of a throat tightener.
Yeah, near miss, so to speak.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I did get down there and did a little short broadcast from the bomb site and talked about it a little bit. But it was obviously so intriguing, not only just to be there, but there were so many. Can we use the word anomaly yet again? There was just so many anomalies related to the reporting and to what we eventually, learned about this. There's quite a few pieces of the puzzle that are still missing, and I don't know that they'll ever be plugged in. But it was one of those things, once again, where the FBI managed to, or at least seemingly cleared that case in record-breaking time, but they've not been able to do that in so many other episodes here lately.
Yeah, and that bombing is kind of a weird circumstance. It seems like the news cycle just sort of, glossed over it. Like that was all the hotness for a couple of days, and then, we got other stuff to talk about. And there was
that's what,
listening to like some eyewitness testimony. There was I listened to an excerpt from a radio show where a lady called in who apparently lived, on that same block, and just so many bizarre details and circumstances around that. Very unique and kind of puzzling situation there.
Yeah, I'm really wanting to get my hands on the full recording of the audio that was being blasted from the RV.
Right.
We've only just heard of, about 30 seconds of it, yet there's much more of it has been described by both the residents in the area and the police themselves, testified to what was going on with that audio, and yet I'm certain that whatever closed circuit television cameras recorded the audio that we've been allowed to hear had to have captured so much more of that, and even the police body cams would have captured it, but they're not releasing it for some reason. That's really curious to me.
Right. And how often? So the most striking aspect of that for me was, at least based on that lady's description, there was essentially a warning countdown that preceded the detonation by upwards of a half an hour, I want to say.
Yeah, something
There
like
was
that.
multiple announcements, and it varied based on timing and increased the cadence and things like that. And it's what a peculiar circumstance, right? Where you
Yeah.
want to detonate a bomb in a fairly populated area, but you want to be certain to give people enough time and advance warning to gather up belongings and safely
Right.
evacuate and clear the area. Just
And then
bizarre.
the warning would cycle out into the Petula Clark song, "Downtown, everyone knows that she downtown."
Oh, I didn't catch that. That's even more bizarre.
Yeah, so it was between the warnings and between the countdown, it would cycle in and play that song, "Downtown," the old 60s song by Petula Clark. Yeah, it was adding more intrigue to the whole thing. But if the guy was just wanting to commit suicide, he could have blown up the RV in his parking lot, or his own driveway rather. He could have gone out into the middle of a field. The point is he obviously intended to hurt no one, at least by virtue of the long warning signals that he gave on the recording. But then to still do it downtown, but not wanting to hurt anybody, I don't know. Who's to get into the mind of crazy people? But there's still just some weirdness about this whole thing. Absolutely. And then, of course, there was no cell service for many locations for the next 36 hours or so. It was about 36 hours before we got. I use AT&T for my cell service, and it was about 36 hours that I was down.
Interesting. So your overall brief trip, I mean, you were never in a given location for more than a day or two, yet you managed to catch on to some rather highlight news stories from the last few months.
Yeah, some would say that that's suspicious as well. That's already been brought up to me several times, that you were in Nashville and DC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
He was there in Philly when they were like secretly counting the ballots too. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I was I began this tour on the day after Thanksgiving, and then I completed the final thing. Was a very, very small kind of protest march in downtown Charlotte on New Year's Eve. I made it home for, I think, I slept in my bed 3 or 4 nights only, and then I took off on Tuesday the 5th to go to DC, and we got there the night before and met a couple of friends that also had flown in from Nashville to join us. We were in the same hotel, so we kind of had a little bit of a gathering party, whatever you want to call it, in the hotel room, with, by the way, the exact same gin and tonic that we made back in Nashville. So it's kind of a thing between us. And then once we got to the Capitol the next morning, we just saw an unbelievable amount of people arriving, and just stunned. I was blown away at how many people showed up.
So you mentioned you got there the night before. Were there indications based on what you saw that of the volume of people that were coming into the protest? Like were streets lined with cars, or parking garages packed, or hotels seemed kind of hustling and bustling with activity?
No, I did not see anything unusual, and I'm pretty familiar with DC, and I'm pretty familiar with big events because my daughter lived there for a couple of years. So I was regularly there she lived in Crystal City, Arlington. And then that's exactly where our hotel room was. We were there. So look, everything's weird right now because there's so many people working remotely. So the streets aren't normal anyway. In fact, we were commenting about that on the drive up to DC is we drove up and drove right into what is normally rush hour We made record time. You don't drive from Raleigh, North Carolina up 95 to DC without at least a 2-hour delay during rush hour. Well, we drove right in the teeth of rush hour and never had to tap the brakes. It was unbelievable. But that's a COVID related, anomaly. There's that word again.
Right.
So, but no, I didn't see a tremendous amount. There were people in line in the hotel that were obviously, they had the MAGA hats on and they had all the, the paraphernalia, and they were excited, and the bar was kind of full that night. And there was, again, a lot of Trump shirts and toques and, sweatshirts and jackets and banners and all kinds of stuff in the hotel. So they were obviously there for that event.
Did you see any sort of, in the evening before, did you see any sort of like kind of warm up exercises from, disruptors or rioters or political dissidents? Did you see Proud Boy activity or Antifa or any indication of that, or was it pretty low key, just people settling into their rooms?
There was definitely something that went on in DC to the tune of several thousand people, but we didn't participate in that. We had our own agenda in the hotel that night. So
Gotcha.
We had a little reunion of friends among friends. So.
What
Okay.
do you want to walk us through? I'm sure you've given the story. You've obviously written it beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe, focus more on some of the highlights.
Yeah.
But you want to walk us through that day?
That fateful day.
I think that there's, as I've written about extensively, and I even did, we put, Scott, my partner, and I put out about a 22-minute video that does nothing but highlight the crowd at the rally itself. Not only do we discuss and do the math on the crowd size, which the mainstream press has never done, but we also did, just kind of a real zoom in tight, frame by frame analysis of what the crowd consisted of, the types of people that were in the crowd. And when we arrived, I guess it was around 9:30 in the morning, something like that, the place was filling up. There were already, there was, well, I'm not going to speculate on how many were already there, but I can tell you that the gentleman that traveled with me up to Washington, we tried our best to get into the ellipse where the main, where the stage was, and so that we could get a better vantage point on the proceedings. And there was no way. In fact, we got caught in a crush of humanity that was just absolutely unbelievable. If you've ever seen that Star Trek episode with the overcrowded planet where the people are all and they're just, they're just shuffling down the hallway and down the streets and they can't move, whatever, because the planet is so overcrowded. There's just not another square inch for anything else to exist. That's the way it was there. We got trapped in this crush of humanity for about a half hour and could not get out of it. We finally, I found like a stream, it was just like really tight little, streams in that crush. And I found a stream and led us out of that. And so we just gave up on getting down to the ellipse and went back up into the Washington Monument lawn. And we took up a vantage point about 150, 200 yards away from the only remote, screen that they had out there. They were totally unprepared for the size crowd. I will tell you that they had no idea. In fact, the organizing agency, I forget what it was called, some Women for Trump thing, but they had purchased their permit for the rally from the Capitol, from the Park Police, for initially for 10,000 people only. And then the day before, because they were getting reports that the hotels were really filling up all around the area, so they upped their permit size to 30,000. Well, let's just start with that piece of math in place. And I will tell you that it was that number was dwarfed many, many, many times over. And I've not wanted to put an actual estimate on it myself, but I will tell you it's very suspicious that if you go on any of the search engines, Google to wherever, you will not find overheads or any shots of that crowd size. They have either deleted them or they just never provided even drone access to get shots of that crowd size. But it was unbelievable. The just a couple of, I hate getting into math because math makes people go crazy. But you can, if you give everybody a 6 square foot space on an American football field, just the end zone, not including the end zones, just 100 yards and then the width of the field, you can fit 8,000 humans in 6 square feet. And a football field is 1.32 acres. Okay, you with me so far? Mm-hmm. The ellipse is 52 acres, and you couldn't move inside the ellipse. Okay, so start your engines there. Then you get into the Washington Monument Lawn, which is 106 acres, and over half of the Monument Lawn, because the largest side is on the White House side, towards the ellipse and up the hill towards the monument. And I've got all of this on video, and it was just a packed sea of people. It was amazing. There were in fact hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. I'm not going to give into some of the bigger numbers that I've heard estimating, 1.5 million to 3 million. I think that's a little bit ridiculous, but I will tell you on a conservative side, somewhere between 600 and 800,000 people. Certainly the largest presidential rally ever, except for, an inaugural event in history. And they were completely unprepared, audio, video. It was just a very, 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 either they were completely caught off guard or they were very, very poorly prepared for this.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people who attended. So one thing for people who aren't sound engineering inclined, when you have a large event like that with multiple satellite broadcasting, multiple speakers spread out, you have to build in a delay. Otherwise, you get a very obnoxious overlapping echo sound. And I heard from other participants there at the event that for certain portions of the speech, that had not been implemented, and it made it almost inaudible at certain times because the delay was overlapping the speech so much so that it was just too distracting to even listen to.
Yeah, it was not only overlapping and impossible to discern one word from the next because of it coming from multiple angles at the same time, as you said, at different speeds. So you were getting not an echo effect. It was just garbled nonsense. But also the PA, I think that they were trying to boost the power to get more and more and more people to be able to hear in the farthest reaches, which they were not prepared for. Mm-hmm. And consequently they were overdriving the system, and you hear it just go
heavy clipping and headroom issues, and
it would just deep, it would go down and then it'd come back up again, but they weren't ready for that crowd size at all. And then, the next thing that we did an analysis on was the content of the crowd. And I'll tell you, in my video's camera frame, I saw no issues. There was no combat gear. There was no tactical helmets. There were no gas masks. There was nobody wearing radio, walkie-talkies. There was no protective vests. It just was a group of, what you would expect to see at an average Trump rally, whether it was, Timbuktu or wherever. It was just not a ominous looking group of people in any way, shape, or form. But we caught those people on video too later.
So what was the tone of the crowd? Like the average participant? I mean, jubilant, frustrated, aggressive? What was kind of the feel of the general populace?
It was celebratory and expectant because as I had announced on my all of my media sources and social media pages that the reason I was going, because I make no bones about it, I was hashtag never Trump before that was cool, and I changed my approach to the Trump presidency after he became the president, and I started just calling balls and strikes. So it was just for me it was just hashtag good Trump, hashtag bad Trump. I'm just going to analyze one thing at a time and one issue at a time and take it from there. And that never changed throughout the 4 years that he was in office. But by the time I got to the lead up to going to DC on the 6th, I had announced that I was going specifically to watch, observe, and cover the event. And I would report back what I saw because I didn't know what to expect. I honestly believed, okay, that if they were going to, unleash the Kraken, it was going to be that day. Okay. So we heard over and over and over again that there was this thing coming. There was this big moment when it was all was going to be revealed. And I will tell you, I had one single hope from the Trump presidency, for all of his flaws and for all the things that he did horribly, and all of his his crap on Twitter, and also for all the things that he did that I also liked. The one thing that I hoped is that he was going to be the guy that was going to push down the pillar temples of the deep state. You know what I mean? That was my expectation, and I wanted to see if that was going to happen to that day and be there for that event and record that day in history. And I will tell you, it didn't happen. It was to answer your question, it was a very jubilant crowd. Expectations were high. There was all kinds of chants of, USA, USA, stop the steal. And, people were singing the national anthem. Flags. I've never seen a sea of flags like that in my life. And because the wind was really whipping that day, it was quite a spectacle. I don't care if you're a Trump fan or not, just to be in the middle of hundreds of thousands of people and just look out as far in every direction as you can see. Literally, you could not see the end of the crowd in any direction. And then just this tens of thousands of big flags flapping in the breeze of all types. So, it was interesting to be in a situation like that, because I'd never been amongst that many people before in my life.
Did the election the prior night have, would you say, an effect on the crowd? Had that brought people down, or were more people just waiting for the Kraken to, appear?
I am certain that the reason that crowd was so large is that everybody thought that day was the day. It was happening that day. We were all going to see the clouds were going to part. Either Jesus was going to ride down on a white stallion with flame coming out of his eyes, or Trump was going to release the Kraken, and we were going to learn beyond any shadow of a doubt that election had been stolen. And neither happened, of course. But then something else happened.
Right. So walk us through. Obviously, people start walking to the Capitol Hill. The perception from the outside, at least somebody who's not an avid MSNBC viewer, is that you kind of had different groups. You obviously had the massive crowd. Then you had some people that were prepared for trouble, seemed to be organized, seems to have had brought material with them. Were working with one another, had walkie-talkies and stuff like that, smashing windows. And then you had another group of probably, valid Trump supporters and people that were participants in the rally, with some oddities, such as, the Capitol Hill police just letting everybody in, opening the doors and letting everybody in. What from your vantage point, what took place? What kind of odd stuff needs to be analyzed? And then
the first thing that needs to be analyzed, and this is hard for me because now it makes me sound like a Trump apologist, and I'm not a Trump apologist. I'm a balls and strike guy. I am a truth guy. I don't care which direction the truth comes from. I don't care, as long as the truth hits me in the head, and then and I recognize it as truth, and I'll take it. So the first thing that has to be understood about this whole event was the timelines. Trump, first of all, very much frustrated his own audience because he was supposed to be on stage at 11 o'clock. Well, after his opening acts, Giuliani and Junior and all that had finished up, then suddenly the stage was empty for 57 minutes. There was nothing. It was just, bad audio, bad music, bad playlist. And they didn't even bring enough songs. So we kept hearing, Journey and a couple of other songs over and over again. And then finally he took the stage at 11:57. Okay. So for those of you keeping score, Trump took the stage at 11:57. I did not stay for even half of his 70-minute speech. It was just you couldn't understand it. You couldn't see it. I looked over at my partner. I said, let's head to the Capitol. Because everybody was going to do that anyway. Everybody was going to go make their presence known at the Capitol. And, to see hundreds of thousands of people going up to the Capitol, I thought that'd be pretty cool too. Again,
was that being organized or people talking about that ahead of time? The plan
yeah,
was
yeah. No, it was always planned. Just and I don't know that it was an organized plan. It was just it was always an expectation because of what was happening in the Capitol that day, that thousands upon thousands of people would then march up there and let their presence be known, and their voice heard. Chanting, and you can imagine, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people chanting outside the Capitol would have to be heard inside, no matter where they were, what chamber they were in. And that's exactly what I expected to happen. But we left early, and I think I took my first, I started taking my first camera, shots of the Capitol itself well before Trump had even finished his speech. And I had to stop at one point in a intersection. I'm walking right down the middle of the mall towards the Capitol, but I counted 7 thoroughfares of streets just packed with tens of thousands of people already working their way toward the Capitol. And if you go look at my video analysis, which it's posted on all our social media page. In fact, my examination of the crowd itself is pretty low key, so I was able to put that one on YouTube. I couldn't put the battle scenes on YouTube, but that examination of the number of people that were walking towards the Capitol, it's, we're talking about, typical overweight Americans, just, and it's a long walk, depending upon whether you were at the monument or all the way down the lips. And considering the size of the crowd, it's anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, for a healthy person. And these people were just, waddling on down there the best they could, good old fashioned, fried chicken eating, MAGA people. And it wasn't a battle crowd, not any. And in all of my videos of the marching towards the Capitol, again, there's nobody wearing tactical gear. There's nobody got weapons of any. They're not carrying baseball bats or hockey sticks or anything else that you've seen or heard about in the news. It's just middle America, working its way to the Capitol, and I've got the video to prove that. At exactly 1:19 p.m., I hit that first tier of the steps, because when we got to the reflection pool, I looked up and I could see the police were piling out of the Capitol. They were running in streams out and running down to something, and there was already smoke. We could already see that there was tear gas, and we could already hear the of like flashbangs going off. And I looked over at my buddy and said, that's where I'm headed. Let's go. And so we ran up there right away, and again, camera in hand. And as soon as I, rounded the corner up to that very first tier where the most, infamous battle scenes were, lines were taking place. First thing was people on their knees getting, first aid from the pepper spray and all that kind of stuff. And guys were ripping at the barricades or the cops. And I was like, wow, because it was fully engaged at this point. These guys had already been there for a long time. And now we saw all the tack gear. We saw everything. We saw the helmets. We saw the protective, vest. We saw the full on militia looking guys. We saw the black bloc guys. We saw every organization you can think of that would be antagonistic towards the federal government were all lined up doing the same thing and going after the same cops. And they were already there. They were not at the rally. That's the part of the narrative that has to be fixed and squashed.
What's
go ahead, Jack.
I guess what would be the biggest piece of evidence that suggests that the people causing problems weren't part of the protest?
I wrote about this in my 9,400 word story that I socked myself away in to write about to get this out before anything else happened, or my opportunity to write would have been interrupted by law enforcement or FBI or whatever. And I said in that I had a new axiom, And my new axiom is that from this point forward, I will only believe what I see with my own two eyes. But then I'm going to go back and look at the video, because when I did my first kind of decompression debrief video that night, myself and the guy that went with me, we posted a video, and we both agreed when we got to those Capitol terrace where the battle scrum was taking place, we both agreed that what we saw was Trump people going after the Capitol cops. That's what we agreed that we saw. We both said on the video, was Antifa there? Oh, most certainly. But this was largely a pro MAGA crowd. And then I had the opportunity to spend 5 days going frame by frame and start tearing into that video. And I will tell you that much more comes to the much more is revealed. What you see with your own eyes and what your human brain is able to process in a circumstance like that, it's impossible to see it all. I mean, you're just seeing 5% or less of what's going on in a such a fluid and hostile and vicious group of hundreds of people going at each other. And so it wasn't until the videotape was rolling that I began to really see and understand what was going on.
So in the videotape, what was some of the most obvious or the things that stood out to you after you looked at it a second, third time?
Yeah, second, third, and 20th time. Some of it I'm even having to go back and look at again because of new information that I've received of things that I need to be looking for. But the first and most obvious thing you see is you do see all of the the MAGA gear. You see all of the pro-Trump stuff. It's just everywhere. Everybody's wearing it. I don't care who you are. Almost everybody's wearing it. Almost, but not everybody. But the thing that was most apparent immediately was the attacking crowd that they're now being called, domestic terrorists and insurrectionists, were unarmed, unless you consider a baseball bat, because there was a baseball bat, and they were tearing these fencing pieces of these black fencing apart, and they were launching those fencing pieces at the cops, and they did some damage there. They injured a lot of policemen that day. I have quite a few scenes of that I was able to get from behind, up above and behind where the police line actually was. And there was police back there getting first aid the whole time. And they would go back and get fixed because they were being sprayed with bear spray and, all kinds of other things. They were being hit with things. And then they would, run back and get on the front line. And then whoever was hurt would go back and get aid themselves. It was quite a chaotic, scene, both on the line and behind the line. But the other thing too is that when you're down there, in the middle of what where it's all happening, is you start seeing also all the preparedness of the group. And I think maybe you asked a little question about that earlier, and I chased some rabbit. But the most obvious thing that you saw the difference between the rally crowd and the battle line was the preparedness that was already there. These people were prepared, and they were also experienced in these types of protests and riots. They knew exactly what to bring with them. They had their medics out there. And you know what I mean by that? They had, we've seen all the Antifa riots all over the country, and we've seen how they have their own layers. They have their provocateurs, and that are waving
umbrella
people.
boys.
Yeah. So, and you got the umbrella guys, you got people with shields, and then they're calling, and then they're inciting. Then you've got, your provocateurs are inciting people to battle, so they're like, and I'm going to tell you, look, let's make no mistake about it. All right. When you look over those cop shoulders and you see that Capitol building, and the darkness that emanates from that place, and the malfeasance, and the number of oath breakers and liars that are inside that building, and those carnival barkers are hollering at you, inviting you into battle, it's powerful, especially when you're in the middle of that scene. And that's why so many of those people that later arrived from the rally that were unprepared for this kind of thing, they got involved. They were drawn in. Yep, they were drawn right into it.
Yeah. It's like there's a Hong Kong protest, Antifa protest.
Yeah.
You don't see that level of preparedness and experience from from Trump rallies. You just don't.
No, it's never happened. It's never, you know what, we've had, you know, an example of one guy hitting somebody in an arena or a ball field one time. You know, somebody punched somebody at a rally. You've heard some bad names said at rallies, but nobody came to Trump rallies prepared like this. And this, as I said, these people were not at the Trump rally. They were already there at the Capitol. They had already broken through the first lines, and they were already doing battle with the cops before Trump ever finished his speech. And then you had the long walk over. It wasn't until much later that the people from the rally came in and were like going, you know, wow.
So lots of times when we see these kind of, riot events or whatever, civil disturbances, etc., the police sort of take on a almost like a sheepdog role. They kind of like herd and guide and corral, and it seems like it's relatively deliberate and controlled. But from some of the footage that's come out from the Capitol riot, and I'm assuming a lot of that was from the area where you're at, it seems as though the police were overwhelmed, underprepared, not appropriately staffed, or had a plan in place to handle that. What was your perception of the law enforcement response to kind of the battle line you witnessed?
Yeah, well, they were not only underprepared and overwhelmed. Those are understatements times 10, but they were also under orders to just at some point just to back. It was like this was my impression. And again, you know, there's what I saw with my eyes, and then there's what I saw in going and reviewing hours worth of video afterwards, is that the post video analysis of all of this is that it was a game almost. It was like, you know, you got your guys on the front line, double up, triple up, let the insurgents press, they press, and then, you know, everybody backs away. Everybody changes their lines. But here's the thing, is that every single one of those Capitol Police, Metro Police, and all the other departments that started reinforcing those lines, they were all armed. This did not have to happen. This thing could have ended in 5 minutes or less. All they needed was one order to draw down on that crowd. And I'm telling you, it'd have been 50,000 Trump people stampeding the other way. Maybe there would have been more damage done, you know, more loss of life had they done that. But the point is that no one ever had to enter that building. No one ever had to break through that line. It didn't have to happen. Just as Minneapolis didn't have to happen, just as Portland doesn't have to happen, just as the autonomous zones don't have to happen. They're being allowed to happen. And I will tell you, my takeaway is that I watched a 2-hour theater play. It wasn't necessarily scripted. It was ad-libbed. And the participants all knew that they were going to be there. And as we all know now, we do in fact know, well, if you remember reporting on the first 2 days, they were talking about the failure in intelligence. And of course, the Capitol Police chief had to fall on the sword and resign. And, but now we know so much better. They knew, the FBI knew, we know that Congress knew, we knew that there were congressmen that were already alerted by their own testimony, their own, interviews on even the MSN. We have testimonies from congressmen that had been warned by their own personal security what was coming. Everybody knew that this.
John Sullivan knew.
What's that?
John Sullivan knew.
Yeah.
The left-wing radical.
Yeah, and I got. Did you know I interviewed James, his brother, the other night? Have you seen that yet?
No.
Yeah, John Sullivan obviously knew, and he's a provocateur from Utah who organized the rally in Provo where somebody was shot. In fact, he was standing right next to the guy who pulled the gun and did the shooting. And then he was arrested for that event. And then he was in DC as well. He was the guy that actually got, some of the best footage, if you can call it best footage, but he got some of the, close-up footage of Ashley Babbitt being killed. And he was actually seen on camera as well, using a police riot shield and breaking that window in that hallway, in the Capitol. And And then he was there, and he was the one that was actually telling her, "You go first." After the window was broken, she jumped up in the window and pow, cop shot her. She fell back, and then he's got all that close-up video. And then, of course, that John Sullivan then was on Anderson Cooper show on CNN with the female videographer, documentarian, and telling his story. And then, of course, when all the other video came out showing him actually doing damage and some of the things that he was said, we're going to burn this shit down, that kind of stuff like that, then obviously he got arrested as well. So anyway, I got I posted, it's on YouTube, a podcast on my channel, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist, of my interview with James Sullivan, his brother, who actually ratted him out to the FBI.
Is James also a left-wing provocateur, or is he kind of like...
No, James is this is an interesting story. The both boys grew up in a very conservative military. Their father was a military officer, LDS home, Mormon family, Black Mormons. Very involved. James is very, very involved in Black GOP politics. And John was a few years ago was actually in training to be an Olympic speed skater. He had quite his own background and story as well. Upwardly mobile, successful in his career, was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in the business that he was in post his failure to make the Olympic team. He went into business and was making a lot of money. And then somewhere along the way, he either got radicalized or he just decided to use this opportunity of the George Floyd thing, the BLM thing, to make a name for himself. And he founded his own movement based
Insurrection
out of
USA.
Yeah, Insurrection USA. He founded his own movement and then made himself infamous in the Provo riot with the shooting there, and then once again in DC, the shooting there, right at both scenes.
I think it's important to note when people talk about Antifa, it's always dismissed by the left or by the people that don't want to pretend like that they even exist. Is this where's their building? Where's their mailing address? Show me their tax ID number, the Antifa logo. Right. It's important to state that Antifa is the word that they use when they pull the mask on. They wear the flag, which is based on the Communist Party, the German Communist Party, Antifascista, whatever the hell that is in German. Yeah. But Insurrection USA, fascism, Stop Fascism, End Fascism, all these grassroots organizations that engage in violent protests. And have their little underground meetings where they're talking about a lot of these techniques and how to get violent and how to stir shit and how to infiltrate Trump supporters and how to shut down a Ben Shapiro speech or whatever the hell. That's what is being referred to as Antifa. So I think it's just important to note those are the specifics of what people are pointing out. And then they use Antifa as opposed to trying to figure out which specific grassroots organization they're talking about.
And they do have a handbook that they work out of. But the interview that I did with James, I specifically got into that, and I said, "All right, I don't want any speculation. I want to know what your brother did that day." And he had himself organized quite a few people. They were actually in a parking lot. I think if I get this wrong, it's on video. It's just my bad memory, but I believe that they met there in the BLM Plaza or Square, whatever they're calling it now in DC, and he openly admits that they were there handing out, had a box full of Trump gear and ball caps, and were handing it out to all their people that they had organized from their particular leftist group that was going in. And then I asked James, I said, well, in your estimation, how many of that, frontline crowd that was there were actually Antifa types or operatives? And he said that he knows from the particular chat groups and the private communication resources that they use, that there were organized that day over 200. So he kind of used it was a minimum of 200 were involved in that particular process. So
Just
I watched
specifically from Insurrection USA.
not Insurrection USA was just part of that overall movement that you were talking about. They have their own little names and their own little cells and their own little, actions that they do. And then they disclaim each other.
So more than John Sullivan's group was present that day and
absolutely.
A part of that violence that took place.
Yeah. And when you're watching the video back frame by frame, you start learning how to pick out which ones are which, because let's not gloss this over. Were the Proud Boys there? Oh yeah, they were there in force. They were there in force. They have been identified. There's been at least 7 of them that are known, activists with the Proud Boys were already been arrested, and there will be more arrests. Were various militias there from all over the country? Absolutely. I've got close-ups of their patches and their, identifying marks. They were there. There were the 3 percenters. Whew, man, they were there in force. But then when you start looking in the crowd, because you can't look at, just as John Sullivan said on CNN, we were there handing out Trump gear for everybody to wear.
Yeah, there's no way of telling.
Right. I mean, you don't get any more, blatant than that. He just said, this is what we do. And then once you start going frame by frame, you start going, okay, you start seeing those Hong Kong tactics that Antifa specifically went over and learned about and brought back over here. And you start going, okay, there's that guy. Oh, wow. Look at that. And you start seeing the ones that stand out with very, very specific tactics that are different from, the other groups that were there.
Did he know how many specifically were from John Sullivan's group?
If I remember correctly, he said that John led about 20 people over.
Wow. Okay. And all 20 were on that front line.
Yeah, but even the girl that was there, supposedly the documentarian, remember she was originally allegedly a CNN journalist. Well, she's not, but she does on her own website. She does list that she has done and provided services for NPR, BuzzFeed, and several other, mainstream and or leftist publications, but not CNN specifically. Although she was also there with John Sullivan on the Anderson Cooper show, and so that
she's a independent left-wing reporter who's
documentarian. And so there's that, there's that famous scene where I think they're inside the Capitol Rotunda, and he's, John is screaming, I told you you were going to get, tell me this is not the best video you've ever got, the best film you've ever recorded. We did it.
Wow. I mean, just right there is enough to show that, what we call Antifa has at least infiltrated some of that, some of the violence and whatnot. But
and then there's, and of course
specific names and specific groups.
And then there's those videos that, obviously MSNBC is just not going to show, where you've got an entire room in one of the Capitol offices. They're in somebody's eye. Have you seen that one? And then somebody's got their head stuck through with the bullhorn and they're giving them instructions.
I did see that one. Yeah,
and this was an entire leftist group in there. There wasn't a militia member in this. These were all, leftist insurgents. I'm not going to say they're with Antifa, but it doesn't take much to be able to kind of identify from mannerisms, speech, the things they say.
That woman that was on the bullhorn is not a woman you'd ever see at like a Trump rally.
No,
there's just certain styles. There's certain cadences.
Right.
That is just an anxious, angry, middle-aged, probably teacher or something kind of woman who's yelling and organizing her minions kind of thing. Right. You don't really see that at a Trump rally.
No, and eventually somebody's going to cobble all of these individual videos together and show this all in one big reel, but it'll never be on, because another one of my axioms is that if NPR, CNN, New York Times don't say it, well then it never happened. And unfortunately, most, at least half of America or more will never get the truth of who was in that crowd.
Yeah. I mean, it's convenient that first of all, I think they said that their Facebook was specifically going to ban anybody who had pictures and videos from within the Capitol.
Yes. Facebook and YouTube both have been, as soon as they go up, they pull them down.
Yeah, I know I've seen some. So it's basically, if it's not on there, then they don't have to address it. They don't have to answer to it, and it's not officially, part of the collective conscience of America.
Yeah. It's the Stalinization of news and information is what we're going through right now.
Oh yeah. So I guess walk us through. You obviously had footage from inside. Footage of the girl that had been shot, and they actually used your footage on the news,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of cut up your interview to make you seem like a a right-wing radical.
Right.
How has it? What has occurred since then? They've mentioned attempts at arresting anybody who was at the Capitol. I guess what has occurred since Capitol Hill?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've not been, as anybody knows, I've not hidden my activities in any way, shape, or form that day. I mean, I did a broadcast that night from my hotel room and said that I was there and said that I was in there. I have not hid that one moment. But again, I wasn't participating in any way, shape, or form, did no damage, touched not a single thing inside or out, not a single cop inside or out. I just was there to.
Be honest. Did you take a poop on Nancy Pelosi's desk?
No, that wasn't me. But I did. I got actually the most, I think, is the most fascinating footage from the hallway in her suite of offices was there. And I've got footage for which we're doing facial recognition on some people. And that's a whole nother story yet to come. I haven't gotten into the full writing up of that episode yet, or that just 60 seconds that I didn't even see with my own eyes, but saw later. But what I will tell you is that after it was all said and done, I never went home. I haven't been home since. I immediately went back to Raleigh, but not Raleigh proper, but somewhere outside of Raleigh. And I knew that just in case I was going to have some legal, liability as a result of just being in the building, and nobody, in the first 2 days knew what that was going to look like, whether it was going to be some sort of, misdemeanor trespassing for those that just wandered through and took pictures, as opposed to the people that actually did damage or fought on the battle lines or hurt people or killed somebody. I was never expectant of anything worse than a trespassing charge, because there's no video evidence that I did anything, because I didn't do anything other than to just document the event as a citizen journalist. And what ended up happening was I holed myself away somewhere for 5 days, did not go home, and wrote that 9,500 word story, and also did the first narration. And then I edited down about an hour and 5 minutes of compressed a lot of what I had down to about an hour and 5 minutes, and then did a narration video, and then got it out and posted it and put it out there everywhere. And then once that was done, I felt like, okay, if the FBI wants to talk to me, it's like, hey, they got my number. I've used my credit cards. I'm not hiding, I'm not paying for gasoline with cash. I didn't turn my, cell phone off or throw it away. I'm not hiding or running from anybody anywhere. But I did head out to my partner immediately after I left North Carolina, and I drove to Oklahoma, to Tulsa. My partner lives out there, and he was not at DC that day, but he and I then spent 3 full days exhaustively going frame by frame by frame through video. We've already released 2 analysis videos of that, and we have at least 2 more to come, and then maybe a 5th one if I find something in this other little thing I teased about a while ago. But we've got at least 2 more analysis videos to come. And then once I finished up in Tulsa, then I headed to Louisiana and spent time with family. And so I haven't been home, but as I said earlier, 3 or 4 days since the day after Thanksgiving. I'm still on the road.
Are all these videos, everything is on the Facebook page, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist, and on the on your YouTube channel?
No, there are no, and the ones that show actual, scenes from the, the scrimmage line at the Capitol are on Rumble. But if you search for the Pragmatic Constitutionalist on Rumble, you'll find me there.
Are they also on your website?
They're not on the website yet. That's just a function of we have to fix a couple of things, but before we really get there.
Okay, so to see your stuff, go to is it the pragmaticconstitutionalist.com?
Yeah. So if you go to the pragmaticconstitutionalist.com, that's the website. If you go to Rumble, it's all just one word, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist, and then you'll get to see a couple of videos there that are not found anywhere else. And then we have we just launched, actually, while I was on tour, probably just a few days before I was even with you in Columbus, we launched our locals page, which is Dave Rubin's version of a Patreon, for free speech and people like us. So we're now on locals, which is the pragmaticconstitutionalist.locals.com. And that's where we're kind of now using as our central monetization platform.
Great. Okay. Yeah. I just want to throw that in there because there's some interesting videos. I'm sure people that want to see it, just so it's locked in and people can check it out.
If you go to the Facebook page, the ones that I can show there are linked there. So the YouTube, like the YouTube interview with James Sullivan, I can show there. The analysis I did of the crowd, it's linked. It's on YouTube and it's linked onto the Facebook page. But the other two that YouTube will boot out as well as Facebook, they're on Rumble, and I just had to tell people they were there. You can't see them on. Actually, yesterday I put a cute picture of a little puppy on my Facebook page. It's a little puppy. He's ever so cute. And in the text are the links to those videos.
Nice. Okay.
So they're there. They're just not, you just can't see them from the page itself.
Who the hell was the Buffalo shaman guy that was there?
I ended up catching him in 3 or 4 times in my camera frame. He was. I never saw him inside the building, but I saw him out on the skirmish lines, and I never saw him. I will, like I said, I'm going to be honest about all of it. I never saw him being aggressive towards the police. He walked up and he would talk to them. He would walk up and talk to them on the front line. And then at one point early on, there's that section of scaffolding where it kind of all broke through, first. And the line started moving up in, where they were really trying to get around the main police line. And so they tore through that canvas, and then they were climbing, people were just, God, it was like, it was medieval was what it was. They were trying to scale the castle wall or whatever. And so they at one point, I've actually got him in video of going up into the scaffolding frame, but this was long before it broke through. And then he came back down. So he was not at all in the group of people that did, in fact, breach the Capitol.
Yeah. It almost felt like a photo shoot. It felt like, when they get those protests, you get the couple guys that have the Confederate flag, and then the crazy guy that they, in that case was the Buffalo shaman, and they have the photojournalists that are already ready there to snap their pictures and everything. Was there a lot of Confederate flags or?
I'll tell you what, this is another one that should be put down, but look, you cannot expect anything less than this from CNN, MSNBC, NPR, blah, 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 all the 3-letter news MSM organizations. Is I saw 2 Confederate flags all day long. 2. And that's all you see. Once they got that 1 or 2 guys in frame, that's what you're going to see more of than anything. Right. And that's, but that's the way the MSN works. And again, I keep saying this over and over again, and people, I've actually been criticized for saying this, but I'm going to continue to say it. I have the video to prove it. I can scan through and show you a sea of 10,000 flags, and you'll see one Confederate flag in 10,000. One. And then I saw one more up on the Capitol, itself. And then, of course, there was the guy famously walking through the rotunda, with the Confederate flag. And I did not see that inside. But he obviously was there.
So what do you think to me, it seems like this is the American version of the Reichstag fire, where it's a justification for consolidation of power and for, obviously internet censorship. Obviously it kind of messied the election where that wasn't even part of the discussion, kind of the similar tactics the day before. What do you think the ramifications are for the event that took place at the Capitol Hill?
I think the worst thing is what I just read 2 days ago, which I actually read through the entire domestic terrorism bill that's being floated on Capitol Hill. If you haven't seen it yet, it's not that long. It's not one of these, 58,000
9,000-page bills.
No, it's a dozen pages, maybe not even that long. But it's a pre-authorization for Homeland Security and the FBI to set up their own brand new agencies, task force, and subdivisions of other three-letter agencies to begin the process of identifying the domestic terrorists. Now, the most interesting part about this is if you read through the entire document, as I did, and actually I read the whole thing twice. And the reason I read it the second time is because I couldn't believe when I actually started writing. I'm writing something about it right now. I just haven't published it yet. And as I began to think about it, I went, no, that can't be right. That can't be right. And so I went back and read the whole thing again, because the entire document only talks about white supremacists, extreme right-wing groups, neo-Nazis, and it does not in one single time identify that these task forces that are now to be, built within as additional sub-agencies within the Homeland Security and the FBI and such, are to focus on any such left-wing terrorists. Not one mention of BLM radicals, leftist radicals, not one mention of it. Not the word Antifa is not in the document at all, unless my mind skipped over it. But I'm telling you, it's just over and over and over and over again. You see the terms, white supremacists, extreme right wing groups, such as that, and it is focused 100. Let's see what's and anti-abortion extremists, those kind of that kind of verbiage is all through the document, but not one mention of left terrorist groups, of which there are obviously many.
It's just kind of their way of closing the door on, as they enter, and make sure that nobody can organize in a similar fashion and have to worry about the obvious resistance groups that are going to take place when they have a complete and total power.
Yeah, well, the follow-up to that particular bill, if it makes its way through Congress and is signed into law, the follow-up is going to be, now, look, the Patriot Act was an abomination in and of itself, because we know that though it was sold to us, it was going to be used to protect us from foreign, enemies and terror groups such as Al Qaeda and such as that. We know that in fact it was used on American citizens on our own soil. In fact, it was used against every single one of us, because they recorded everything that's ever been on any of our telephones. They've got it, and, so it's been used against us already anyway, and illegally so. And then, if you remember, what was his name? Lied about it on Capitol Hill and said no. Who was that? It was the national security guy. Anyway,
was it Brennan?
No, it wasn't Brennan.
For some reason.
Wasn't Brennan. It, I actually went and heard this guy in a lecture one time. He was quite fascinating. And this was after he was caught lying that I went and heard him. It'll come to me, but or maybe it won't. But anyway, so the point being is that there's going to be now a concerted effort to use the 6th as justification to overtly let the American people know that they're going to keep us safe from those right-wing terrorists, and they're going to come after us. And we hear it every day. We hear the idea of we've already known about the lists. They were building the list of people before the 6th, and then since the 6th, they're talking about deprogramming. So we're all going to be deplatformed until at least we're deprogrammed, and then they might let us back, on the playground again. Who knows?
It's essentially a complete attack on what any of us are interested in doing, which is obviously organizing an effort and seeing, classical liberalism and American values, individualism, freedom, liberty prosper. And in order to do that, we need to create the groups, we need to create the communications, and this is a direct attack on that to make sure that we can't pose a threat, that we can't be identified in that group consciousness, because any activity that we'd be doing would just be classified as terrorism, as bringing up, being in support of white supremacy because we are in support of American values, because if they identify them as racist, then obviously if we're going to take them down, then we must be the white supremacist.
Look, they've already set the standard that silence is violence.
Right.
So now, especially if we speak, so silence is violence, and now, to actually speak out is now terrorism, and that's exactly where they're trying to focus the nation's sensibilities, and good God, man, I said it sitting at your kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio. I said, I've never been talking about COVID. I've never been more disappointed in Americans than I've been in my life. How easily, they took the bait, drank the Kool-Aid, whatever you want to call it. They just bent over and took it. They took everything that they threw at us about COVID, and and then I can't even believe my personal social media feed, particularly on obviously on Facebook, because what I read every single day, having literally thousands of musicians that I'm friends with and know and have associated with over decades that are on Facebook. And it literally is in the thousands that I see, and my news feed of what they say about us. And when I say us, I am the single most reluctant poster child of Trumpism that there ever was, because I never became a Trumpophile, and never became a Trumpist. I never became a MAGA hat. I don't own a single Trump bumper sticker. Never have. But based on the two options that were given us in November, and although I had already voted against him, I voted for Gary Johnson in 2016. I scored Trump a 0 on my liberty quotient back in 2016. I scored Hillary 15%, and then I scored Gary like 70%, but with no chance of winning. But the other two choices were just so repulsive to me that I went on ahead and threw my vote at Gary Johnson. Fast forward to 2020, and now Trump had a record. So I was scoring him about 50-50. I had him at about 50% on my, liberty quotient scale. And God knows Biden was, people don't know this about Biden. They've talked about him about being a moderate. Go look at his voting record. Go look at all the agencies left and right in the think tanks and that score people. He was left of Hillary. Often, in many of them, he's left of Bernie. So when they talk about him being a moderate, that's just because of his good old boy kind of talk, his down home, middle class, Joe the plumber almost version of, the left-wing Joe the plumber, but his actual voting record. I don't listen to politicians' speeches. I don't listen to their voices. I go back 100% of the time and I evaluate them on what they do, not what they say. Don't give a crap what they say. And when it came to evaluating Biden, it was just a simple function of going back and looking at his voting record and realizing that in most cases, in most years of his career, he was voting left of both Hillary and Bernie. And so given that option up against my score of Trump at a 50-50, okay, I said, okay, and I said it exactly like this. I said, I actually posted a picture of the Hollywood squares. Remember that, the big Hollywood squares where the over the hill famous people, would sit up in the 9 squares, and they played tic-tac-toe by answering, silly questions and giving silly answers. And I specifically said Trump to block. I didn't say Trump to win. Voting Trump to block. Right. That's not a ringing endorsement of a candidate, but because I did pull the lever, for Trump, I guess now I'm on the list.
So what do you think? We've seen, of course, fairly mainstream voices, including members of Congress, calling out for lists and repercussions for membership on said lists. Where do you see that going? What do you think is on the horizon on the glorious 4-year reign of the Biden-Harris administration?
I hope that they're going to push too far. All right. And there's, as you know, there's probably already we're already seeing a few cracks in that circumstance that they're just pushing too far, too fast. Both COVID, George Floyd, the election controversy, and then you throw in the pièce de résistance of January 6th, and all of them winning all of those battles. They won them all. They've won the PR battle on all of those. I mean, it was by midnight, January 6th, they had won that PR battle hands down.
It was a blitzkrieg.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They just ran over any other potential narrative or explanation for the day. And as a result of that, they feel like that they have carte blanche. They've got this blank check now to do whatever they want to do in terms of suppressing the voices from the other side in any way and marginalizing us. Obviously, we saw what happened to Parler. That was bold, man. That was bold. And then to have a judge just recently rule in Amazon's favor, I'm sure that's not over with yet. There's going to be more challenges. That's going to go up the ladder much further. But I mean, they're bold, and I'm concerned right now that this is going to break from just being a social media blockade of voices into where, even though, if you go to Gab or if you go to some of these other servers that have their own servers and their own setup, as I talked about before, somebody's already got the off switch. You remember, I sat there at your kitchen table. I said, okay, it's great, guys. We can all jump from Twitter to Parler. We can all jump from Facebook to MeWe. We can all jump from YouTube to Rumble. But I said, somebody's got the off switch on every one of those platforms too. And boom, Parler, they turned it off. I went, oh crap, they really do have the off switch. And so we're going to see a lot more conformity on people that are trying to protect their little territory. They're going to give in. They're going to give in. They're going to give in. They're going to yield. They're going to yield to whether it's Apple or Google or Amazon or whoever controls the off switch to their apps or their internet access or whatever, their servers. We're going to see a lot more yielding take place there. And then the scariest part is this move to take the banking away from voices on the right. And that's already happening. We already know, we already know that, especially as related to gun sales, that, certain banks will not process credit card sales. And so those calls are already out there. You know, they're talking about having and again, they're not hiding it, whether it's mainstream media voices or actual, you know, Congress creeps on the Hill are actually calling for banks to step up and wait until there's legislation coming down for that. Because, you know, let's just be, you know, perfectly honest here from my own vantage point, is government took my job away from me last year. Took it away. Wasn't the federal government, but my governor took my job away from me by executive fiat. I was not allowed to work anymore, and I haven't been back to work. I don't have another contract on the calendar till April of this year. And that's if that holds. So I will have effectively been without my income for over a year at that point. So back in May, June sometime, we kind of scrambled. We did a quick fundraiser to expand on what the Pragmatic Constitutionalist was doing. Went out and bought a bunch of, podcast gear and said, okay, well, let's redeem this time. I've got all this time sitting on my butt doing nothing, and let's redeem this time and try to make something of it. So we started expanding what we were doing, and then the election comes around, and then the first thing that Facebook does is just throttle the absolute hell out of us. So we went, from an average reach of between 50,000 to 150,000 people seeing my stories, posts, blogs, comments, commentary, whatever I put out there per day. That was my daily average. To now, my monthly average is only about 50,000 in reach. So I went from 50,000 to 150,000 as a daily average to the bottom end of that as my monthly average since the election.
Well, let me ask you, do you have any hope whatsoever for America? In the sense of its people being able to speak, not having your land taken away, your property taken away, expropriations, anything? Would you honestly suggest pulling the cord and leaving the country?
No.
Or do you think that there's some, is there a path for being able to communicate with one another still, with fighting back, with building any sort of resistance, or are we just kind of biding our time while we're here?
If anybody thinks that they can leave this country and find a better place, they're absolutely fools and naive. There is no place to go. We are the last stand on this planet. And so we have to make our stand here. So let's just start with that premise. And if somebody wants to email me or message me and argue that point with me, I'm ready for them. I'm well traveled enough internationally. I can tell you exactly what block the IRS building is in that particular country where you think you can go. The IRS building actually says in that country, the Internal Revenue Service of the United States of America, in that country where you may think you can go and hide. So the point is that I will tell you from a positive standpoint is that there's this whole concept right now that's emerging. Some people are calling it a red state economy. Some people are calling it a patriot economy or whatever, where in fact there are now it's festering. It's boiling to the surface right now. I would love to get involved with it as quickly as possible myself. I've even thought about putting together the list and compiling them. I'm just so, I don't have the staff and the people and the money, and the time to do this. But the first thing is begin to support one another. Begin to identify in your community and elsewhere like-minded individuals, patriots who we can support. We've got to buy our goods and services from somewhere anyway. As we know, we know that now there's a couple of phone services out there, off, AT&T. But remember, you can go hook up with Patriot Mobile if you want to, but AT&T's got the off switch there, right? So there's always an off switch at some point, but there are in fact some very, very well-heeled people, including some billionaires, that are starting to talk about building an infrastructure that will be much more safe for both internet, banking, and so many other in so many other industries. But we've got to get through, we got to get through 2021, because as I said, those guys are just, it's chum in the water right now to the lefties in Capitol Hill, especially after January 6th.
It seems like a lot of people were sitting on their hands waiting for that Kraken and for other people to do the hard work, and thinking that Trump was some 40 chess player that was putting together this dream case. Obviously was never going to happen. And so I am discouraged by the kind of lack of American spirit and the lack of American, I guess, clarity. Feels like even on the right side of the fight, there's 90 different things that people are fighting and trying to go about in different ways. And there's just that lack of cohesion and that lack of, coordination. My biggest fear is, it seems like from this point forward, one would never be able to know how truly vast they are. Meaning, I'm not convinced that Joe Biden didn't get 30% of the vote. Meaning, because we probably couldn't tell, because, there's no signs to show this guy's not that popular. You could always dismiss events, lack of attendance, by saying it was COVID related, or the lack of video, watching. But take his inauguration address,
right.
100,000 views. And it got to the point that YouTube was actually deleting dislikes.
Right,
So
exactly.
They're going to do their best to create the perception that numbers exist that might not exist, that diminish other numbers. And, it's going to be very hard. We might be at a point where 80 to 90% of people agree with us. And how would you know if you're constantly not in view of each other, if you're kept from mainstream platforms? You might even start to see the addition of bots and things that aren't even real. From this point forward, how are we even going to truly know that we're successful, that we're actually building and growing such a network, when we're not going to be able to see it or use any sort of vastness?
No. But that is one of the things that we talked about there in Columbus as well, was that we have to stay in touch with one another by any means possible, any and every means possible. And that means, if we got all, I posted this as a joke one time, but I posted a picture of, ham radios for dummies on my Facebook page. and I was, it was tongue in cheek, but it was dead serious about it. If that's where we're headed, that's where we'll do it. And I'll do podcasts from ham radio if I have to. I don't know that we can call it a podcast if we're on ham radio, but you know what I mean? But we're not there yet. Okay. We're not there yet. And the first thing, as I said earlier, that I'm hoping for is that the left trips himself up by pushing too far, too fast. And because look, you and I could both right now rattle off 100 examples of, and do it rapid fire, of just blatant, overt hypocrisies that are coming out of this administration right now. All right, so let's just, I'm just going to mention two real quick. So the first one is that we are a nation still. I think I read it yesterday, the day before, on either Wall Street Journal or Forbes or something. There's still 14 million people still can't go back to work because of COVID, something like that. 14 million. I'm one of them. My career has basically been put on ice since March of last year. And so the first thing that the Biden administration does is sign executive orders that eliminate tens of thousands of jobs, with the cascading effect of those jobs being eliminated. Because I don't care whether you believe in trickle down or not, you pull that kind of money from the oil and the industry sector out of communities and out of other places, the trickle down effect from a negative standpoint is going to be devastating in a lot of communities. And so that's the first thing that he does. So he's going to bring America, he's going to put America back to work. You know, he's going to help us recover from COVID, but his first executive orders are putting tens of thousands of people out of work in high paying, you know, good tax paying jobs. So that's the first thing that goes. And then the second thing he does is he announces, I think, what was it? What was the one today or yesterday? An executive order banning travel in something like 25 countries, right?
Yeah.
Something like 25 countries. Am I right about that number? 24, 23, 25, something like that. And yet, you know, he also signed another order stopping work on the wall. Now I've never was a pro wall guy. I've been anti-wall since the beginning of anti-wall, probably not for the reasons that maybe you are and a lot of other people, particularly people in the libertarian side of the equation that we, you know, some of us come from. I'm an anti-wall guy from a completely different standpoint. Has nothing to do because I'm also not an open border guy, but just the inherent blatant contradiction of, you know, calling Biden himself said that Trump's travel bans early in COVID, you know, going all the way back to January, that those were xenophobic. Mm-hmm. That's Biden's words. And that they were racist. And now Biden is doing the same thing. And we can go and we can list these hypocrisies and these contradictions all day long. And believe me, their apologists have answers for them. I've heard their answers for some of these things. But for sensible people, there are still sensible people sitting out there who vote Democrat because that's what their families always voted. And they look at that and go, yeah, you're right. And so if they continue to push too far, too fast, I think they're going to see more and more cracks on their side.
I think you're right, but here's the problem: is I think that the new divide, the new fight, is going to become Biden almost on the right, and then this new far left party, almost your AOCs, your Bernies. I think you're going to see almost a communist, socialist, openly socialist party versus the kind of the new Democrat or the old Democrat.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm going to see. I think we'll see the fight and almost the color revolution right there, where it's like, okay, now have this character that you want to pretend that they don't want that revolution to exist when they're fine with it. You know, it's kind of like the Portland mayor when you had the people out in the streets, their little cultural revolution, and they were yelling shame, shame, shame. Mm-hmm. And then, I think it was Portland, right, that had now the openly communist mayor. I think you're going to see something like that, except countrywide, because this is going to continue. Obviously, they're starting to build movements in Portland and Seattle, Antifa, if you will, against the Biden administration. So when it comes to the point that people are pissed off, the economy's getting destroyed, people, don't have health care. Right now, we still wave the banner of capitalism, whether as much as we know how much that's not true. The problem is now going to become lack of health care, lack of UBI, people starving in the streets. And so it almost feels like Biden is the burn down guy. You burn it all down, and then who builds it back up? It's not going to be it's not going to be the Patriot Party. It's not going to be the Tea Party. It's not going to be the Conservatives. You're not even going to see those people. They're not going to be part of the equation. They're memory hold. They're not part of the America's consciousness. You're going to have the new Conservative Party doing things American way, still bombing Syria, still, putting, not doing any kind of progressive policy. And then this new wave comes in. They're going to take to the streets. They're going to at least provide an answer so that Joe dumb American's going to go, well, I lost my job at the factory, but there's this color revolution. I'll go participate and be a part of that and amplify that. And then, the movement, it's kind of like the yellow vests. The yellow vest came about because of like carbon taxes. Then it became something else. And eventually it gets hijacked by the radical left because those groups are organized and they take the movement and they turn it into their issue. Black Lives Matter is a great example. That's about, inequality, justice, social justice, whatever. And then it becomes hijacked by the Marxist left. They amplify, what they want by raising up certain voices and just using that plea as means for their kind of communist ends. That's the same thing I think we're going to see with the Biden administration. He's going to play the dummy. He's going to be the resistance. He's going to go, I'm still the capitalist. I'm still the doing things the American way. And I think you're going to have a true color revolution that takes place within the next 2 years, 4 years, whatever it amounts to be.
Yeah. If it happens the way that you described, though, Biden's going to misidentify who the capitalists are, because he's going to point at, the Bezoses and he's going to point at big tech as capitalism. He's going to point at, Costco's and the Walmarts and all of the other oligarch corporatists,
right?
Crony capitalists, as it were. That's who he's going to point at as the capitalist. The reality is that
we know that, but right. Most people don't know that.
Right. No, they don't, and that's why you and I have to say it right now. And for that fringe of the audience that are listening today that came in to criticize and throw bombs at us, either in chat rooms or wherever they're at watching right now, those people need to hear that. First of all, capitalism still exists, and that's what's been mostly under attack for the last year. Capitalism has been the number one target of COVID hysteria since day one, because capitalism still exists in rural America, in small town America. It still exists in the mom and pop shops, because that's where real capitalism still, because those people aren't getting funding from, federal government subsidies and the like. And so that's where the make it or break it entrepreneurs that risk everything and work their way into some sort of upper middle class, or maybe even become the self-made millionaires, of which as we know, like 86% of all millionaires in this company started with nothing. They built it themselves. They inherited nothing. And so those are the true capitalists that are still out there. So capitalism still exists, except that it's been under attack this year in a way that it's never been under attack before. And not only did mom and pop stores have to endure COVID, but then they had to endure George Floyd's aftermath and having their buildings burnt down and having entire neighborhoods and streets closed. My city of Raleigh, North Carolina was one of the most vibrant, top growing cities in America, and has been for 15, 20 years. And it's a freaking ghost town downtown Raleigh now, because of that 1-2 punch they took there. But we have to say these things. We have to continue to say it, whether people believe it or not, because we're picking them off, man. They're going to see it. I mean, just like the unions. You got the executive order shutting down the pipeline, and the unions now that supported Biden are pissed off at him. The Native American tribes in New Mexico, they're pissed off at him. Tens of thousands of jobs are being sucked out of the economy because of these new executive orders, and he's pissing people off that supported him.
Yeah, well, those people don't need to worry. We're going to go ahead and recruit them into the military so we can deploy them to Syria to help guard the Syrian oil fields. So, we'll just repurpose that economic loss to somewhere else.
Well, and you bring up a great point, right? Because if we lose our energy independence, well, then we have to go defend those oil fields again, don't we?
Right.
Or at least use that as the justification for
for
malfeasance we're dabbling with over there at that time.
So to lighten the mood a bit and to borrow on a meme that's been working its way around. So if anyone who's right of Bernie Sanders is going to be an insurrectionist or domestic terrorist, when do you guys think the CIA will start providing us with Toyota pickup trucks and small arms?
All right, I know where you're coming from. I don't even have to answer that question, do I? Yeah, man. It's the absurdities are immense. There are too many to list. They're beyond description. And I'm less worried about the CIA obviously right now than I am worried about our domestic situation. It's the whole idea of defending the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic was always more important to look over borders, and we look, because we do live in a dangerous world. Let's be honest about that. That danger in the other parts of the world has not gone away. That's why I've never been an open border libertarian. But my entire focus is on what's going on in my own neighborhood now. And that's where we have to do. That's what we have to do. You know, they say all politics is local. Well, guess what? We got to reorganize. We got to go back, and we got to win back at the school board. We got to win again back in, you know, local politics. We've got to somehow, some way strip those city councils and those mayorships away from the left, because they own them all. You know that, right? They own them all, you know, of any cities of any size. And I think it's something like 34 or 35 states legislatures are completely controlled by, you know, the GOP. But you get down to the city level, man, that's where the damage is being done. Not that the GOP has helped us a lot at the state level.
Yeah, I really don't trust much with that GOP.
No.
They feel closer to controlled opposition than a true alternative option. I mean, what's the saying? The only thing that the GOP and the Democrats disagree on is the rate at which a government should grow.
Yeah. No, that's ultimately the way it plays out. But you're exactly right. You know, it's either we're running off the cliff at 65 miles an hour, 95 miles an hour, but either way, we're going to go off the cliff.
Right.
And that's always been kind of the analogy there. But there are still some stark differences. There's still some people. Certainly more so on the conservative / GOP / liberty side of the equation with some common sense. I mean, you saw the way Rand Paul went after George Stephanopoulos yesterday. That was pretty epic. Loved it. He drew a line in the sand and said, "No, you're not crossing that, and you're not calling me a domestic terrorist."
Yeah, well, and I've also seen the manifold attempt at hit pieces, the collective outcry from all leftist media over, you know, the clutching of pearls at how could Mr. Paul dare to be so violent, or I don't know, I can't even summarize them, but yeah, the collective gasp that he might in some way oppose this hostile takeover of culture and every branch of government. Right.
Yeah, well, because you're not supposed to have free speech anymore. And he was exercising not only speech, but his opinion. And he was also exercising the way he called Stephanopoulos out and said, "Look, you know, you're supposed to be a journalist. What are you doing taking the other side? You don't even care what I have to say. That's not your job." And it was fantastic the way he called him out and said, "You're not doing your job. You are a mouthpiece for the other side right now." And that's exactly what I mean. Look, I got fact checked by. I'm to the point now. You realize I don't care now, but I know that I'm going to lose my Facebook page. So we've rebuilt on MeWe, and we finally got Gab set up yesterday. It took us forever because they're so their servers are so overwhelmed. Finally got Gab up yesterday. We're on Rumble. As I mentioned before, our primary monetization platform is now Locals, but the most recent fact check I got from Facebook was an opinion that I wrote. It was an opinion. I wasn't quoting facts or contradicting anything. And you know what they fact checked me with? An opinion piece by a mainstream journalist. They didn't even fact check me with a news source. They fact checked my opinion piece with their opinion piece, and boom, throttled me even more.
I've got sort of a standing game where whenever I see those fact check things, I always try to figure out why and read the fact check. And my little game is to see how often the fact check actually corroborates the item or the article in question, but slaps a missing context or false or misleading label. Right. And when you read on it, the headline, statement by Steve Baker is rated as false by our fact check. And then you read down it. While it's true that everything he said did occur, if you frame it a certain way, we feel that it's misleading. So that's why we've chosen to label it as false.
Right, because of the way it was framed.
Yeah.
One of my early ones post-election, because it's just been just a series of them since the election. But do you remember there was a particular event that was happening in the Pennsylvania election count, and I don't recall the specific event right now. I'd have to go back and dig through 3 months of posts, but there was this thing that I found hard to believe that was making its way through the right-wing, pro-Trump media.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't even post the article. I took a screenshot of the alleged accusation. And then because I like to have a discussion with the people that read my stuff. So I actually said the words. I said, is this true? Can anybody corroborate this information? I just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Bam. That was the one they deactivated my ad account and said that I posted false information. And no, guys, I asked a question of my followers that read, the 35,000 people that read my stuff every day. Is this true or not? Because I wanted people to tell me, because I couldn't find corroborating information. And so I got fact checked for it. And my ad count has been deactivated. And by the way, that particular one earned me a permanent ad count deactivation. So I can't even buy ads to tell people where we are now, which is kind of clever on their part.
There's a lot of things that I see that I guess our side of the fight needs to start doing. I feel like there's been a major dereliction of duty. I think we still like our comforts. We still want everything to be easy. I think everybody hopes that they can just go to Parler or go somewhere and still just kind of post memes and just scream out into the open air and be an observer of a lot of things that are taking place. But there's just not quite there, for whatever reason, as far as we get, there isn't that thing that mobilizes people that says, I'm going to be somebody that reaches out. I'm going to be somebody that does things actively. I'm an active participant. I'm going to do the reading. I'm going to take it upon myself to honor the sacrifice of my forefathers and my ancestors and the people that built the country. There's still this sense that it's good enough. I don't want to rock the boat. I'll go along with things. And I don't think there's an appreciation for just how bad things can get, how quickly it's going to get there, and just how urgent this moment in time is, because there's going to be we're going to pass that event horizon where it's impossible to have a little organization, to network, to reach out outside of a certain circle. Imagine living in China right now.
Right.
What's the process? If I had 1 million people, I don't think I could flip China. If I had 100 million people, I couldn't flip China. I don't know the number of people I could have that would flip China. And so there's a certain point between now and China where it's impossible, where you better just suck it up and go along with it, because that's your forever purgatory.
Right. You can't flip 100 million people in China because they're unarmed.
I don't know if the difference now is armed or unarmed, though.
Well, let me tell you. Here's what we have to do, and we have to be so effing careful with our language right now. But the bottom line is that if we're going to storm the gates, as I mentioned earlier, we have to storm the gates of our local school board. We have to storm the gates of our local city council. And
I think we have to withdraw from them because they're so corrupt. They're so cancerous. I don't think your vote matters. I think a vote can be corrupted. I think we've seen that in Chicago for 100 fucking years. I wouldn't trust I don't trust voting.
I don't trust my own vote to be counted any longer. I would
just remove students from, I wouldn't go to public schools at all.
Well,
I think it's a horrible model. And I think I think just removing ourselves from these institutions is probably less energy and effort than trying to
I know,
decorrupt them.
but here's the only downside of that. And by the way, I agree with you. I have been for years and years and years and years saying, get your kids out of public school. And I can sit down and financially show most middle class families how they can afford to do that, and how they can either homeschool or get them into private schools if they're willing to listen. If they're willing to make sacrifices from some of their their luxuries and wants that they have, and live off of needs for the sake of the future of their children. So I agree with you in that regards. But I will say this, is that we're not going to be able to hide on our little islands. We're going to have to be brave, and the Patriots are going to have to come out in numbers and let them know that they may not change. They may not back down. They may not change a single vote by us being there. But we have got to let them know that we're watching. And look, this is one of the things that they took out of context when I did the interview on the CBS affiliate there in DC that day, when they used my footage and made me feel all important for a moment, was that they had asked me a question about my support for what was happening at the Capitol. And then you could hear, I mean, it was the most unbelievable. It was the worst edit job that a major, TV station could make. And it was this awful cut. And I was like, 100%. Well, what they didn't hear me say in the full context of that was that the spirit of what was going on that day and what caused this to happen. And they had the Capitol dome framing me up in one shot. And I pointed over my shoulder, and I pointed to the Capitol. I said, there's a darkness emanating from that building right now. It's full of liars. And I actually said these words. I said, you understand that the next time this crowd comes back, they're not coming back with Trump flags. And I meant it, because if they continue to push, and they push too hard and they push too fast, as I said earlier, that's what they're going to drive us to. But we're not there yet. I'm not there yet. Everybody's trigger point, and no pun intended, is different from the next person's. We talked about that a little bit that night at your place, but everybody's line in the sand is different. And I'm not there yet, but I'm also a man at this point in my life where they've taken almost everything they've taken my career from me. And, when you take everything from that many people, you're creating a dangerous situation for yourself already. And that's what they've done. That's exactly what they've done.
I can definitely see that. And I think it'll end up justifying what it is that they're trying to do. Which I think one of the reasons why, in part, we need to learn. I think we need to accept the L. I think we realize that the long march of their own has persisted for decades, and we saw it come to a head. They were fighting liberalism for a century, since the beginning of the progressive era, and we've been enjoying the fruits of a liberal society, and we didn't pay attention to the responsibilities necessary to maintain our rights, and we now live in their territory. They own. Yeah. They own all the institutions, and they're aligned with governments from the local to the state to the and I mean collectivists. I don't mean GOP or Democrats. Collectivists, people in favor of centralization.
Progressives, however you want to.
I think it's important that we rephrase ourselves, because this is one of the things that communists do, socialists do, whatever you want to call them. They don't just put a label on themselves and say that this is what I am. And I think we have a tendency to just be raw. This is what I stand for. This is my position. This is my label. I think we need to kind of reorient ourselves and, be a little bit more subtle, be a little bit more in the conversation, because whether we like it or not, we exist on their platforms. And I don't think we should just do this thing where we all go to Parler, we all go to Gab, we all go wherever, because if we don't exist in their faces, they can't see us and they won't hear us scream. They won't know anything. So we need to be there. We need to be a pipeline of information for people, no matter what that takes. And if that means being as vanilla as possible, as not being so clear with our agenda, with not being so clear with our vision, maybe that's what we need to do. and maybe rephrase things like we're in favor of decentralization, and people, you might be in favor of centralization, but just be still present on those platforms. Doesn't mean we can't be talking to one another. Doesn't mean we can't be on Parler, on Gab. But I think one of the things we need to do is like Alinsky-ites. We got to put on the suit and tie, and we got to still exist within their infrastructure. If you work at a place, then and it's woke and it's going through all their HR nonsense, then you still need to be in that position, even if it's miserable. I don't think the path to victory is just get enough mad people and then go storm something. I think it's going to have to be doing the work and having the conversations and being a big, vast network. And our activity is going to have to become more subversive.
Well, I felt that way for years. That's why I labeled myself 11 years ago the Pragmatic Libertarian, was because I believed in instituting a reverse progressivism type thing. It had worked for the progressives for 100 years plus. And so why not just turn it back around? Instead of being a flame-throwing libertarian is doing exactly what you're talking about, is progressively start turning the tide back the other way, no matter how long it takes. I just never dreamed that we would wake up today and be on the precipice. I didn't think this was going to happen in my lifetime. People ask me all the time, why do you waste so much time writing all this political shit, blah, 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 blah. And my answer was very simple. I always said I do it for my kids. I do it for the country that I'm going to leave for my children, my grandchildren.
Yeah, now you're doing it for you.
No, that's exactly right. I'm doing it for me because am I going to make it through this year?
Right.
Without, being either in handcuffs, in prison, or shot for using words and being labeled a domestic terrorist. They're already talking about deprogramming me. They're already talking about putting me on a list. We've seen that movie, man. We've read that book.
Yeah.
We know where that's going.
So I think one of the issues is kind of like paper, rock, scissors, where, paper beats rock, but I don't think rock can then beat paper. Communists do well in a liberal society, not vice versa. They're well aware of what it took to take power, to be subversive. And that's why we see these laws on the books, is because they have entered and now they're closing the door behind them. It's like a business. You become a big business and then you bottleneck the competition. That's what they're going to do. So we can't do things as easily as they were able to do to us. That's why I think it's almost more about building something ourselves that's as isolated and insulated while still existing on theirs, because we need to be a pipeline for their people. But I don't think we flip anything. I don't think we deal with their corrupt, trash institutions. I think we need to build the foundations, and we need to build stuff ourselves, our own schools, our own entertainment, our own infrastructure, our own banking systems. Yeah. And honestly, they're going to go after every fucking one of them. They're going to go after crypto. That's why you already see Janet Yellen on day one talk about how Bitcoin is only used for illicit activity, and we need to go after it with the Fed because we want our own global centralized currency, whatever the hell they want. And so we need to build, while at the same time know that they're going to be attacking every little piece, every little thing that we build. Unfortunately, it's the only way that I think we can be that we can even have any sort of sanity.
Well, I actually believe in that concept of two Americas. Remember the vice presidential candidate from North Carolina, John Edwards. He had that was his message with, but he meant it in a negative context, is that we live in two Americas. There's the America of the haves and the America of the have-nots. Yeah. And obviously being on his side of the political aisle, he was the champion of the have-nots before he cheated on his cancerous wife, and his wife with cancer, rather, who was dying of cancer. And then, and when the first time I ever heard him say that, I went, two Americas. Yeah, I'm good with that. Let's build our own economy. Yeah, I'm totally good with that. It has nothing to do with the haves and the have-nots. In fact, I never published this, but I have a skeletonized article that I wrote several years ago during the healthcare debate. So this is 10 years ago now, I guess, when Obamacare was rolled out, about two healthcare systems running parallel to one another. And actually I designed it, designed these two healthcare systems running parallel, and you got to pick which one you wanted to be in. You got to be in the universal healthcare system, or you got to be in a free market system, and you couldn't change. But you could only change on it with a 5-year application. So if you wanted to move from the free market healthcare system to the government healthcare system, it was a 5 years after application before you could move over, and vice versa. So that pretty much dealt with any pre-existing conditions, and you couldn't just jump back and forth and take the best of both worlds. But obviously much more complicated than that. But I've always been okay with the two Americas idea, and a great, they point to smaller population countries like Sweden with 10 million people, or Denmark, or wherever is the ideals. Well, great. You've got half the country, right? You've got 80 million that voted for Biden. Okay, you guys all go do your thing. You got parallel banking, parallel healthcare, parallel this, and you go do your thing. Let us do the thing. Land of the free, home of the brave. Y'all go be brave in that system, and I'll be brave in my system. And have always been okay with that. In reality, they're not going to let us do that unless somebody says
they won't even let us. They probably won't even let us homeschool in the next couple of years. I would imagine.
No, except
that's for the form of radicalizing, kids.
And and that's going to be some people's trigger. They're no, you're not going to tell me what I can do and can't do with my kids, and they're going to go down in a blaze of glory. So everybody's got their different trigger.
So I'm planning a trip to Mexico where I'm going to try at least stay for a brief sabbatical. And if it goes all right, then might be here longer. That's why I mentioned earlier about like what were your thoughts on leaving. I do believe the idea that it's temporary. Like there's no alternative to America. Once America goes, the world is a satellite of China and the UN and the IMF, the World Economic Forum. It's just a matter of where is it worse. I like the idea of staying on a place that's just less infrastructure, because maybe the technocracy is just not as bad. And at least where it currently is, you don't have the woke culture there. They're kind of libertarian on accident just because their government's so incompetent, not because of any kind of like ideological framework or anything. But homeschooling was another thing where it's much easier to be to homeschool in Mexico. And it looks like the future of homeschooling is a lot better there than, say, the United States. And so, I don't know what's. I think there is an argument to be made, not that the final battle is America. That's once that goes, the fate of the world is known. But if there are places to go for the individual, even if you're still a part of that fight, I think there is an argument to be made that there are better alternatives to the United States, whether you look at, being obviously the amount of debt that America owes. And yes, to get off the books for that debt is extremely difficult. To not be a citizen anymore is extremely difficult. But some of the things you don't have to deal with: property taxes, the hidden costs associated with any sort of business, starting a business, buying things. You don't see that nearly as much in a place like Mexico. And so I do think there is an argument to be made, especially to the person that wants to homeschool and wants to live off one income, especially if you're working remotely, or if you're an investor. I think I think people should at least consider it, because I think we know the direction that things are going to take in the United States. And I don't know.
Well, there's this other thing. There's this other aspect, is the fact that we're doing this broadcast right now and recording this podcast, is that you're on that list too. You and I are much further down the list than some of the big voices, but we're on that list. And once you start start the process of expatriating out of here, there's a little IRS law. I think it was passed in, it was either 97, or it was somewhere between 97 and 99, 1997, 99, that basically said, as deemed by the secretary, if they deem, they don't even have to prove it, if they deem that you have left the country for the purpose of not evading, but avoiding your tax obligations to the IRS, the federal government, then they have the right to impose that on you for a period of 10 years afterwards. And then depending upon the extradition treaty, they can extradite you if you refuse to pay. If you're in a non-extradition country, then you're trapped in those borders for the rest of the time. Because if you cross it anytime, any place, anywhere in the world where there's an extradition treaty, because it's actually in the code now, the IRS themselves have their own extradition privileges now throughout the world and various, most jurisdictions now. And so, so once we get out there and we start talking about taxes, and we start talking about freedom, and we start talking about patriotism, and we start talking about liberty and libertarianism and all these things that we've briefly chatted about and glossed over here today, and then of course you and I both done much longer versions, written and otherwise, about the very specific incidences, our issues. Once they deem that we have left for those reasons. And so I say, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. And the best thing to do in my mind is to make that last stand here, and by whatever, means necessary. And we're going to, disagree and agree on something, on some ways to do that. Obviously we've done that tonight, but the best thing to do is to find out what our line in the sand is, and maybe pull it back just a little bit, so we don't get over anxious like those guys did on Capitol Hill, on the 6th. Because when in the heat of that moment, man, it's easy to let it go. I'll tell you, I felt it. I felt that pull. It's an amazing thing, the psychology of the mob. And you feel it, especially when you feel the way we feel about what goes on inside that building. And it was grace of God and a little bit of common sense that kept me out of the fray, because it would have been easy to let go.
Do you think it was still fair to say that it was controlled on their part? Meaning, like, there was no threat to a senator or congressperson?
I wouldn't say.
They kind of know this is the course it was going to take, and they got their stand down orders, and
right. I wouldn't say that there was no threat, but there was a moment when the stand down order happened, and it was unbelievable. I mean, it really was. I have up close personal videos of cops just walking around on they're like at their cell phones. They're just like heads down. Crowds are just they're streaming into the building itself now. The doors have been thrown open from the inside, by the way, the inside. The doors have been thrown open. There's just lines of cops, and some of them are just standing there on their cell phones. They're not even watching the crowd. It was like facade, theater, charade, 2 hours, stand down, cops jumping off their phone. And then the shot happened inside the Capitol, and then everything changed. The guns came out. Then they all drew down, and it was over. They started clearing.
Was it a Capitol police officer that killed that girl?
That's what they say. It was plainclothes. Mm-hmm. It was somebody actually specifically defending the House chamber. So whether he was ordered, I'm not going to get into conspiracies about, this was a diversion or whatever for the guys that were stealing Pelosi's, secret laptop, blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, the most nervous I've been is the girl that was arrested for the laptop. Have you seen the photos of her? The girl that was arrested for stealing Pelosi's laptop and saying that she was going to sell it to the Russians. Oh, okay. All right. Just start there. The girl who stole Pelosi's laptop, pasty, white, underfed, Antifa looking girl, if you've ever seen one, openly says she's going to sell the laptop to the Russians. Does that sound like a Trump supporter? Okay, let's just start there. All right. every single photo of her inside the building, I'm in that photo.
No shit.
Oh yeah, could show it to you. Don't have it here,
Wow.
right? Yeah, I'm in every one of those photos. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And you just blast it across CNN and Fox News and everywhere. Every single photo they showed of her, I'm in that photo. I don't know if you can see this or not, but there she is, and that's me with my red Yorktown hat on, right behind her.
Oh my!
And that's the Fox News cryon underneath it. And then there's another one of like on CNN or something as well. I've got all the screenshots and saved all the videos to all of those moments.
You might want to reconsider coming to Mexico just for different reasons.
Hey, you know what? Like I said, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to hide. I haven't hid anything that I did that day, and I'm not going to start now. I understand the difference between being an accredited journalist that has been, issued a badge by CNN or some other news agency. There were also journalists in the building that day that work for, that's their job. Their job is they cover Congress, photojournalists and people that work for the various news agencies that were trapped in that bill. They were in there getting the story themselves when it all went down. And then there were some news crews. What was the British news crew? ITN went in there and they did a hell of a story. It's one-sided, but man, they got some great footage and very professionally done and edited. And it was a professional news crew that followed them in. They weren't sanctioned in there, but they had the badges, so they went in. And then there were people like me that were doing nothing but covering the story. Now there was an assload of tourists out there. That's all they ended up being. They were just, oh my God, look, we're in the Capitol, and they're walking around and they're, and they didn't do anything wrong. They weren't fighting in the skirmish line. Just all of a sudden the doors were open. The cops stood aside and there's just this massive crowd of people going in. They didn't know not to. And by the way, there's no sign on the door that says do not enter. Not on one single door. Now, there's some people that broke in some windows and broke in some doors and busted some stuff up and crawled through. We've seen it. We've seen the videos of that. But the vast, vast, vast majority of those Trumpsters that went into that building that day, they were just like, oh, wow, we can go in. Oh, cool. And they just got in line and went in and, did a little bit of videoing and walked around and, chanted USA, USA, whose house, ours house. There were all these chants going on. But then there were some people just like me that were there doing nothing but covering the event and took this, followed the story where the story went. And that was, that's what I did. And then, I ended up getting very sad, but up close footage of Ashley Babbitt being wheeled out. I actually walked right beside her while they were working on her. She was about 6 feet from me on my left. And then, and I was exiting the building at that point. I was actually being escorted by a very kind and gentle female Capitol cop who came up to me. I was by myself in a lower hallway, and she came up and took me by the arm, and she said, "Sir, can I lead you safely out of the building?" And I, she was a lot shorter than me, and I looked down at her and I said, "Do I need to be led safely out of the building?" She said, "Yes, sir, you do." And so as we're walking down this hall towards the exit door, she kept asking me. She asked me 3 times. She said, "Sir, do you feel safe?" And I'm like, yeah. And then she asked me again, "Sir, do you feel safe?" So when she asked me the 3rd time, she said, "Do you feel safe now?" I said, "Do you feel safe?" And she went, "No." And right then I realized she was trying to divert. The reason for the weird questions was she was trying to keep my attention over here because we were getting ready to walk beside the girl who had been shot, who was being, worked, but the commotion was too loud. She couldn't keep my attention on her. And I turned my head and I looked over here and I thought it was a guy. You couldn't tell because of the blood. And even though they had her shirt off, their hands were all over her chest and pushing on, and trying to resuscitate her. And I looked back over at the cop and I said, who shot him? She said, we did. I said, why'd you shoot him? She said, he pulled a gun on us. And of course, that's what's going through their radios. They had no idea, that confusion of the moment. There are hundreds of cops. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't know who pulled first, who did what, whatever. But they're just the confusion of the moment. And so not only she thought he was a guy too. She didn't even know it was a girl that was shot.
Yeah.
She said, actually, quote, he pulled a gun on us. Yeah. So she takes me to the exit door and said, have a good day or whatever. It was kind of a weird thing as well. And so the door that I went out, I was actually inside of a police barricade, completely, with the bike rack barricade and the cop line and everything. I'm inside with the door. She let me out. I'm inside the barricade. I look around, and just as I'm walking out the door, the EMS are wheeling the gurney in, and all the EMTs are pulling this gurney in. And so I just kind of looked around, and nobody was paying attention to me. So I went and got right in front of that door, if you've seen the video, and I just camered up right there in front of that door, because I knew that whoever the guy that had been shot was going to be wheeled out that door as well. And so I camered up, and it's just surreal. Okay, first of all, I'm inside the police line and nobody's bothering me. Not one cop says a word to me. And inside my camera frame, you can see them walking by, and they're walking by me on their phone, just like this, as they move by me. It's just bizarre, man. It is bizarro world. And so I wasn't out there 30 seconds, and the door kicks open. And then about 20 seconds later, the gurney comes out, and man, they got heavily armed security, guys, automatic rifles in front of her. And then she comes out, and that's when I see it's a girl. And it was pretty, because I could actually see her. She had no shirt on. I could see it was a girl, but I could also see her face really close up. And that was the first time I realized it was a female. And as soon as it was over, I actually texted, because I'd gotten separated from the guy that I was with. And I texted him and said, hey, shots fired, girl's been hit. She's not going to make it. Because I've seen death, and I knew she was gone. As soon as they wheeled her out, I went, holy crap, she's not coming back from this. And then I made the mistake, unfortunately, of walking by a film crew, and they were everybody's getting it over their radios, and they're going, shots fired, blah, 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 and they're all, so the actual legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate news people are trying to figure out what's going on. And I heard this film crew talking about it, and I said, oh yeah, I got footage of it. And they're like, what? I said, oh yeah, just got it. And, can we see? I said, yeah. So they all gathered, the cameraman and the news, the field reporter all got around my phone, and they're looking at me, and they're like going, holy shit, can we use that? I said, yeah, I don't care.
Should have charged them.
Well, I actually have an agent now, so, but I did give them that footage. Yeah.
You might need to get John Sullivan's lawyer too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think so.
Maybe it's more the DA in that example.
Yeah.
Right. So speaking of two Americas, I think that's the biggest thing for me from the Capitol protest, riot, insurrection, whatever, call it what you will. But the videos coming out of that are so strikingly contrasting to one another, right? You'll see one snippet of video that looks like a very aggressive, riot line. They're fighting with police. They're trying to push through barriers, things like that, etc. And then you see another bit of footage from, as far as you can tell, the same building, the same day, maybe a slightly different location, and it looks like a guided tour through the rotunda or stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're calmly walking between velvet ropes, and oh, did you see that over there? Oh, that's kind of neat. And it just seems such a bizarre blend of stuff from just your run-of-the-mill whatever protest attendees kind of meandering about the building, and then in the other end, fairly violent looking clashes between Capitol Police and protesters.
Yeah. And there were violent clashes inside. I didn't actually get any of that because at the point that I, first of all, as I mentioned before, when the doors were thrown open and the crowds all started moving in, I was still down on the police line and taking video down there. And I look up where the scaffolding was, and where there had been a battle line inside and up in the scaffold. Like I said, it was really medieval, like, they were climbing the castle walls or whatever. And all of a sudden, it's just this free flow of humanity to the top. They're going to the top. And I'm like, okay, I'll get in that line. And so I was at the tail end of it, but I went up there, and by the time I got up to the next level, which was actually the kind of the main floor of the Capitol building itself, on the inside, there's open doors, and people are just streaming in. I mean, it's like you said, it's tourist time, and the cops are just standing there on their phones. They're chatting with each other. They're all armed. This didn't have to happen. Not a single person had to enter that building. And it's just a day of tourism in the Capitol at this point. And then there, as we've seen, there were some actual battles going on inside the Capitol building. I never saw a single one of those by the time I was escorted out, because as soon, that was kind of my MO. I wasn't disobedient or confrontational with any law enforcement whatsoever of any branch or any agency. But when the girl said, "May I, safely escort you out of the building?" I'm like, "Well, do I need to be?" And she said, "Yes, sir, you do." I said, "Okay." I'm not going to argue with them. Just, I take the same attitude about wearing a mask. I walked into a coffee shop just the other day, and immediately they were all over me about the mask thing. And they said, "We'll give you one." I said, "No, that's all right." I just turn around and walk out the door. I'm not going to wear one. And, but I'm not going to fight over it either. And so when she asked me to, "Can I escort you out?" I said, "Yeah, that's fine." So I allowed her to escort me out. And apparently there were a lot of people inside that did not take that approach, as we know, because we've seen the skirmish lines on the inside of the building as well. I never got into that, but I will tell you, one of my most interesting moments was right after the gunshot, when the guns came out. When the guns came out, everything changed inside. All those guys that were standing around talking on their phones at that point, they got their guns in their hands now.
Did they make it clear that they were given stand down orders?
Nobody ever said that it was in my earshot, but it was all too obvious. I mean, because look, these guys operate on a hierarchy, command and control situation anyway. They're not going to, first of all, they weren't going to go stand on that line and take that abuse unless they were ordered to.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to put themselves in. And let me tell you something. So this guy's got hurt, man. I saw him get hurt. And they're not going to go do that of their own volition. So they had orders to do that. And then all of a sudden they had orders not to do that. And then all of a sudden, because they were ordered not to resist, they pulled their phones out. I assume that, the guys were checking in with their families or their wives or whatever, and saying, "Hey, I'm okay." I know you've been seeing us on TV. They're probably all texting their wives or calling them, and their families or mothers or whoever. And then there was a gunshot inside, which I did not hear. But it was obvious when it all changed inside. And all of a sudden now they're all drawing down. They've all, they've all got their weapons in their hands now. And there was tear gas going off inside now, and they're making an effort to start clearing the building out. But they were scared. These cops were scared. They didn't know. They at this point, there hadn't been any gun, fire outside. They had been, had bars thrown at them, and obviously somebody had a fire extinguisher thrown at their head and killed, unfortunately. And then there was, there were guys that were hit with poles and bats and hockey sticks and, all other manner of projectiles. So there was a lot of that going on, but nobody had pulled a weapon on them yet. And so when a shot happened, they didn't know that shot came from one of their own. Just at this point, their radios are going off. There's you can hear it on my video. There's calls for triage. There's calls for, we need you on this floor, blah, blah, blah. And guys are going everywhere. All of a sudden you see the actual ATF coming in with the automatic rifles now. Everything changed at that point. And they were scared because they didn't know now, okay, crap, the real guys are here. This isn't just a bunch of good old Proud Boys outside, beating us up. Somebody's pulled a gun. And so they were legitimately afraid.
Well, this is amazing that at the end of the day, you essentially were at the Reichstag fire, except in the United States.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth, that is a major historical event with major ramifications that you were on the front line of and caught video of. So for whatever that's worth and whatever trouble that brings.
I'll tell you, I still don't know if it's going to bring any trouble. Fortunately, the Washington Times ran a story 2 days ago saying that now the prosecutors and some of the cooler heads, even among Congress people, are prevailing and saying, okay, look, first of all, we cannot arrest everybody because it's just going to overwhelm. I mean, they're already the DC court system is already overwhelmed because of COVID delays anyway. And to arrest, 800,000 people, however many actually went inside the building, is just impossible.
For mostly trespassing, essentially, which most of it would be a waste of time.
Right. And I think, they're up over, 100 and something arrests right now, but they're identifying, but obviously they're focusing and identifying on people that caused problems, did damage, fought with police, are identified particularly as part of militant groups and did engage in destructive behavior. And so that's where their focus has been. But there have been a few catch and release people from, that were just there being, playing tourist. And so they've charged them with some level of trespassing, but most people have been let go on their own reconnaissance. I mean, hell, even John Sullivan was let go on his own reconnaissance. He's under house arrest right now, but they let him go. But we know why they let him go.
Right.
Yeah, that's just kind of par for the course.
He was on the right team.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I'll close it out, at least that portion of it, by saying this is that this event was planned. This was not an accident. I'll say it again. The FBI, Capitol Police, Congress, they all knew about it. They knew it was coming, and they knew exactly what level it was coming at. The other thing that they knew was, and this is what really chaps my balls, is I am tired of hearing them call this domestic terrorism. A bunch of unarmed people against an armed police force is not terrorism in any way, shape, or form. What happened was allowed to happen and probably encouraged to get the PR results that one particular side got. And that's what I saw with my eyes. That's what I've seen on the video since reviewing it 20 times. And that's my conclusion. And the domestic terrorism narrative is absolute bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying what they're calling it, bullshit.
Oh, and how it's going to be used and what's going to come of it is going to be scary. It's going to be Patriot Act Part 2. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
So, this is great. We can call it. It's been 2.5 hours.
Get out of here.
So let us know about continuation of the road trip. We think that's great. What you're doing and trying to get groups together, and depending on where you go, maybe try to at least send some people your way.
Well, see, now that Bernie has, I'm not Bernie, but now that Biden has healed us all and has changed everything, and now that we have, New York and some other Northeast
COVID
are opening up venues again, so there's going to be restaurants and bars where we can actually meet. Because I originally delayed. The very beginning of my Northeastern run on the road trip was going to begin with DC as the first date. but so many of our contacts, like you there in Columbus, so many of our contacts were writing back to me and going, man, I can't, there's just nobody, everybody's afraid to have there's no locations in these I thought, okay, well, let's wait a couple of weeks and let's get through the inauguration. Let's see if the Kraken comes, blah, 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 blah. Let's wait, and then the other thing too is unfortunately, talking about me losing my job, my calendar was clearing up, because I'm a full-time musician. That's what I've done, for most of my adult life. And so, my February, first of all, my January calendar collapsed and my February calendar collapsed, March collapsed. So now I don't even have a date on the calendar until April 20th. So I had extra time to plan and work my way up to the Northeast. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to go, I'm going to just go home. Go to DC, come back the next day, take a week, organize the trip up, push it off a couple of weeks, and then we'll find alternate venues and that sort of thing. We'll make it work. But now that we've had an extra 3 weeks since the big day up there, and venues are opening, so I think we're going to have a much easier time of it. And so I'm planning on actually now, because I've got extra time on my calendar, because of all the extension of the lockdowns and the closures of venues in my part of the world, I'm going to go ahead and start in Florida yet again, like we did last time, except instead of coming towards the Midwest and the South, South, I'm going to go straight up all the way up the East Coast from Florida.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, keep us informed, and dates and places and whatnot, and then I have there's a couple projects that we're working on that one's a website, Open Discourse Society. Been trying to get the framework built together and have a couple scripts out there that we're gonna use for ads. So when that's further along, I wouldn't mind having you on again, because that could be something you find interesting, and maybe even have a hand in the pile for.
Yeah, love to. Thank you.
So yeah, we'll definitely we'll stay in touch.
Fantastic. Yeah. I guess we're supposed to close it out with all of our various locations. So, the easiest way to find me everywhere and anywhere now is the Pragmatic Constitutionalist. And if anybody is interested in helping us pay for these things that we're doing now in this expansion of our outreach, they can either donate on our website, thepragmaticconstitutionalist.com. Just go up and find the donate link up in the upper right-hand corner. And then we have like a Patreon page, but it's Dave Rubin's locals.com. So it's the pragmaticconstitutionalist.locals.com. And that's going to be the place that we're going to offer exclusive content. So I've been recording today some exclusive content for our supporters there. And we've set the paywall really, really, really low. It's only for $5 a month. People can get a lot of additional info and content from me that they won't see on any of the other social media sites or even our own website. So that'll be our kind of our hub from this point forward. And hopefully nobody has the off switch to locals. That's what we're hoping.
Off switch for everything.
Yeah. So, here's one.
Right, well, very good. Yeah, we'll stay in touch. So
hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jack.